Music and culture, cigars and rum, classic cars, amazing architecture and scenery. It's not hard to have a great vacation in Cuba, but I wanted to go to look a little deeper, to look into a proudly socialist country, a country that's opposed the United States for the past 60 years. Fidel Castro ran the country since its revolution in 1959. I bought my ticket to Cuba the day after he died. Traveling in Cuba isn't simple. Your cell phone won't work, and since your bank's not connected, you're going to have to carry cash. I used Skyscanner to find a cheap flight, and Airbnb is a good way to find an affordable room with a Cuban family. Both Google Translate and Maps.me have offline versions that you can use anywhere. Because my Spanish is limited, I chose a simple question to ask people for my video. How is your revolution? ¿Cómo es su revolución? My cab driver from the airport was the first person I talked to.
¿Cómo está su revolución?
¿Cómo?
Yeah.
Mi revolución. Muy bien, muy bien.
Muy
I
bien.
like Cuba.
Yeah,
It's the best.
sí.
For me, it's the best.
Sí.
It's the best in America, my country.
Sí.
Yeah, I know. You know? Cuba es lo mejor del mundo.
Sí.
Lo mejor.
Sí.
Mucha seguridad, mucha naturaleza, lindas mujeres.
Nice.
I like Cuba.
Sí.
It's the best.
Sí.
Yeah. The future. It's normal.
Sí.
Maybe the change, the economic, but it's normal. For
Sí.
it is okay. But economy, maybe un poco más economía, todo bien.
Yeah.
Ya.
Sí.
Todo normal.
Sí.
Sí, todo normal, como ahora. Ya.
Yeah.
Lo mejor.
Yeah. Bueno.
Sí.
Bueno.
Claro. Ya. Cuba para mí es lo mejor.
Sí.
Sí, lo mejor.
Muchas gracias.
I dropped my stuff at the Airbnb and hit the town. That ride to the airport cost me 30 cook, and that's about what the average Cuban makes in a month. So you can see why that cab driver is enjoying his revolution. Not long after leaving my Airbnb in Havana, I was approached by a fellow who tried to hook me up with his friend. I told him I wasn't interested, but he still was willing to talk about his life in Cuba.
So, ¿cómo es su revolución?
In Spanish, sir, in
Uh,
Spanish,
How is your revolution?
revolution is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Huh.
Because the government have everything, and people we don't have nothing.
Yeah. Good.
Cuban people don't have nothing.
Is it getting
The
better?
government have a lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of money. The government have a lot of money.
Is it getting better?
You belong to the government?
No.
No.
No. Single. Yeah.
No, the situation here is very hard, sir.
Yeah.
The economic situation is very hard.
Huh.
You know the embargo, American embargo,
Yeah.
is very strong
Yeah.
with us, with the Cuban people. The government have a lot of things. The government have a lot of money. The Cuban government have a lot of money.
Yeah.
They can live with embargo forever. They have a lot of money. But the problem is with the people, the Cuban people.
Don't have as much. Yeah.
The problem is us.
Yeah.
We don't have so much to live.
Yeah.
For example, I work in the park. I earn 15 cook for 1 month.
Okay.
15 cook, 1.5
Yeah.
for 1 month.
Yeah.
It's nothing, sir.
Yeah.
I have a family. I have one husband, one wife. I have a wife and daughter. I have a wife and a daughter. And with 15 cook, it's impossible to live with them.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people give you something to you. Some tourists they give you something, but it's not always.
Yeah.
It's not always.
Yeah.
It's impossible to survive with 15 cook per day.
Yeah. What do you want to see in the future?
No, we don't know, sir. We don't know what happened.
Yeah.
What going to happen in the future?
Yeah.
Probably the embargo. If the embargo continue, no, will be the same situation.
Yeah.
Same situation here.
Huh.
He told the woman he wanted me to hook up with to give me her contact info, but instead she gave me a great list of things to do in Havana. In the airport, I met an engineer from LA who worked for Elon Musk's Hyperloop. She was in Cuba to surf and dance. We agreed to meet for a drink at the Floridita, one of Ernest Hemingway's old haunts. After a few drinks, we cruised around the city and went dancing. Havana is a lively city at night, but since most drinks in the bar cost about a fifth of what an average Cuban makes, you'll see tourists in the bar and average Cubans on the street sharing a bottle with friends. The art and architecture in Havana was really impressive. That night and throughout my trip, I went to a few bookstores in Havana. Most were political and about the revolution, and many were written by Fidel himself. The next morning I had an awesome Cuban breakfast provided by my host for just $5 The first place I stayed was an Airbnb just east of the capital. Havana is a city with a population over 2 million, but when I travel, I like to explore neighborhoods. The Paseo del Marti is a hangout spot for the neighborhood both day and night. As a poet, journalist, and organizer, Marti helped start the Cuban independence movement. After 3 wars in the late 1800s, Cuba won independence from Spain when the United States intervened in the conflict. As part of that war, the United States also took control of the Philippines and Puerto Rico. U.S. influence on Cuba would continue until the revolution almost 60 years later. The Malecon is another community gathering spot. It's a great place to be for sunset. You'd think the People's Revolution would include a crosswalk or a curb cut for those less mobile, but those were exceedingly rare. This looked like a pedestrian vehicle crash. At the bar, I met 2 guys who were very patient with my Spanish and gave me a cigar that I smoked on the whole trip. My second Airbnb room had a bit more charm than the first one. They were a super nice family and invited me to dinner at a restaurant called Notre Dame de Bijou. It's a small family restaurant, but apparently it's one of the places President Barack Obama visited when he was in Cuba in 2014. Later that night, I went to Café Travelin. The next day I had plans to meet up with a friend to hit the beach. Since my cell phone didn't work, I just had to go by his house. He wasn't home, but a friend of his, who asked me to buy him a drink, was willing to talk about his life in Cuba. ¿Cómo es su revolución?
Mi revolución es buena.
Sí.
Es buena. Es muy buena. Educación gratis, medicina gratis, los niños aquí están bien.
Sí.
Las personas están equivocadas con el tema de la revolución cubana. Todos los gobiernos tienen un sistema y cada cual tiene que adaptarse al sistema. Aquí los Castro tienen un sistema, Putin por allá tiene otro sistema, Obama tiene un sistema, Donald Trump ahora tiene un sistema. Y todos los presidentes tienen un sistema, hay que adaptarse. Es la ley y hay que adaptarse. Todos los sistemas tienen cosas buenas, todos los sistemas tienen cosas malas, pero de nosotros hay más bueno que malo. Es así.
¿Tiene familia en Estados Unidos?
Tengo familia, tengo padres, tengo hermanos, tengo tíos, todo.
Yo prefiero Cuba.
Sí, prefiero, claro. Prefiero mi país.
¿Por qué?
Lo amo con la vida, prefiero mi país, claro que sí.
¿Por qué?
Porque no hay violencia. Lo que sucede en Estados Unidos con los negros, aquí en Cuba no sucede.
Sí.
Aquí lo mismo un negro puede ser ingeniero, médico, licenciado, piloto, lo que desee, puede hacer. Allí, si no tienes dinero, es imposible. Tienes que trabajar. Las escuelas allí, hay escuelas públicas, pero no tienen la misma calidad que la tienen aquí en Cuba las escuelas públicas. Y mil cosas.
Sí.
Lo que pasa es que hay que quitarle el bloqueo americano, ese bloqueo hay que quitarle en el barco, para que tú veas que los cubanos aquí están más contentos, más felices, entonces ya podemos viajar con más, como se dice, en un mundo más abierto, como viajan todas las personas del mundo, y así.
Instead of the beach, I decided to go to the Museo de Revolución. The plaza in front of the museum has been taken over by kids playing soccer. They use the benches as goals. The museum is located in the former presidential palace. It was last occupied by US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista, who was thrown out of power by Castro and his revolutionaries in 1959. You can still see bullet holes from a previous coup attempt. It shows the scale of this revolution. Only 40 people were part of this raid. And only 82 fighters came across from Mexico with Che and the Castro brothers. They came in a pleasure yacht called Grandma. Trained as a physician, Che embraced militancy after watching a socialist Guatemalan government overthrown by US forces. Only 12 fighters survived the landing, including Che and the Castro brothers. And after 2 years of building a movement while hiding in the mountains, Batista was overthrown. For 30 years, Castro held near authoritarian power over his government, but Cuba was also one of a few governments in the region to resist US-backed regime change. As part of its revolution, Cuba sent teachers, doctors, and military aid all over the world. It was the height of the Cold War, and Castro was a charismatic voice of socialism, speaking from America's backyard. Outside the museum, a woman from Brazil agreed to talk to me about what the revolution meant to her.
¿Cómo es su revolución?
Como é, o que significa para mim revolução? Can I speak in Portuguese?
Sure.
It's better.
Okay.
Eu acho que revolução tem a ver com transformação. Transformação ideológica, transformação das pessoas, também como solidariedade, como envolvê-las também para um projeto juntas, que é algo que seja mais igualitário, não que seja egoísta, mas uma coisa mais de igualdade. Isso foi a revolução para mim. Transformação de
Okay.
ideologia de pessoas.
All right, bueno. Gracias.
On the way home, I ran across these guys. Performers along the Malecon are fairly normal, but these guys were especially good. After they finished, the fellow from Europe tipped each performer individually. The guitar player in green on the right plucked each bill from the hands of the performers and said in English with a smile, "Band leader." The next day, me and my friend Ross met up to go to the beach. He brought his cousin along. He suggested a beach about 20 minutes out of town, easily accessible by bus. We arrived fairly early in the day, and the beach was mostly empty. But as the day wore on, the crowds grew. And all of a sudden, some Cuban guy in a suit started setting up chairs in front of us. Ross complained to the guy, but he just ignored him. We were pretty annoyed at first, but I guess it wasn't their fault. They asked me to take a group photo. And pretty soon we were all taking photos. Somebody bought a bottle of rum, and the party was on. They were all from New York City, and some of them were children of West Indian immigrants. Ross is a salsa instructor with the Cuban government, so he started giving lessons. The trip was organized for this sister's birthday, so let's give her some space for her birthday dance. It's hard to think about the future of Cuba without considering the impact of tourism. Cuba welcomed 750,000 visitors in 1995. In 2015, that number climbed to 3.5 million. And between 2014 and 2017, arrivals from the U.S. alone went from 91,000 all the way up to 619,000. That kind of money's hard to ignore, especially when Cuban wages are so low. Taxi drivers, Airbnb hosts, even musicians, the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in Cuba, even though it's a socialist country. The American flag is a common theme in fashion around the island. and even though it was a close socialist ally. The only thing you see of the Soviet Union are these old cars, but there's only a few compared to the American models. My final host was a music teacher, who had big plans to open a bar on her deck. The socialist government wasn't an obstacle, she said. When I arrived, she was working on her website with a student from the country's art college. Buildings are being rehabilitated all over Havana, and you can really feel the change. The government has also loosened its restrictions on the internet as of last year. Paid hotspots are set up in parks around the country, and Cubans are taking advantage of the internet and the opportunity to learn about the outside world, even though it's expensive. It's hard to say what the future holds for Cuba. Can the country continue its socialist ideals while still welcoming in new money and new ideas? Or will Cuba be transformed by capitalism, as so many cultures and countries have before them? Before I left, I went by and saw Ross's mom. I dropped off my Elvis shades that he loved. Cuba's an amazing place, but it's hard to have a genuine experience because everybody wants to sell you something. I don't blame them, but it's still annoying. Maybe it's less of an issue outside Havana. It was my last day in Havana. Several taxi drivers offered me a ride, and one, after I said no, asked me to buy him a beer. It was my last day, so I said yes. After a few beers, it was time to go to the airport. He led me to this amazingly restored piece of American steel. I did tip him for helping me find the car, but not the ridiculous price that he first quoted. The ride was way overpriced, but I'm glad I did it. And even though the fever of capitalism has taken hold on Cuba, they still have free housing, free education, and free health care. Buen provecho con su revolución de sus amigos en Estados Unidos.